In the last few movies, we've been looking at how we can use URLs, links, and forms to perform GET and POST requests and then work with those values in PHP. There's one last way that we can interact with our users in the user browser, and that's with cookies. Our web server can make a request to their web browser to send back a cookie. So, as you can guess, cookies are going to be accessed in the same way that GET and POST requests were. Remember, with GET, we put $sign and an underscore in front of GET, and POST, we had $sign underscore in front of POST. And we'll access cookie variables the same way. But unlike URLs and links and forms, where we knew we could use HTML to set those values before we retrieved them, with cookies, we need to learn one additional thing, which is how to set a cookie. Setting cookies is going to take this format. Set cookie, and then in parentheses, that's going to be our function. In parentheses, the arguments, the first one will be the name of the cookie, the value of the cookie, and the expiration of the cookie. If you go into php.net, it'll give you full information about set cookie, where you can actually set things like the domain for the cookie and more information if you're really into the complexities of how cookies work. But these are the essential parts that we're going to want to keep in mind: the name, the value, and the expiration. So let's set up a PHP page where we can try setting a cookie and then retrieving its value. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of my process.php from where I was working with forms. And forms.php, I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to make a new file called cookies, and I'll change the name here to be cookies and remove our form from the middle of it there. So in order to set cookies, we just saw that the way we do it is with the PHP function setCookie. Now we need three things in there. We need the cookie name. So let's set a cookie, and we'll just call this one test. And then I'll put a comma and the cookie value. And let's go ahead and instead of putting a string there, let's put in a value like 45. And then the last thing is going to be the expiration of the cookie. Now, expiration is going to be a Unix timestamp. Now, if you already understand what that means, great. If you don't worry about it, because PHP gives us a nice, friendly way to work with that. We can get the current time as a Unix timestamp by just simply saying time. And that gives us a time function that returns the time in a form ready for us to use. We don't need to worry about it. Now, that time's not going to look pretty if we output it. It's going to be in a format that Unix, the computer, would understand. Then going to put a plus sign after it, and we're going to basically say, okay, from the current time that this script executes, how long should this cookie last in terms of seconds that the cookie should last? Now, of course, we can make this cookie only last for 5 or 10 seconds by simply putting a 5 or a 10 in there, but we want this cookie to persist for a while. That's the whole point of setting a cookie. So let's say that we want this cookie to last for a week. Then the easy way to do it is to put parentheses and then perform some math to figure out how many seconds are in a week. Well, there's 60 seconds in a minute, and then there are 60 minutes in an hour, and there are 24 hours in a day, and then there are 7 days in a week. And this is very common. You'll see a lot of PHP programmers actually write that out. You could go ahead and figure it out if you wanted to, but why not let the computer do it for us? So 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. This cookie will expire 1 week from right now. All right, let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to save my document. I'm going to go into my web browser, and I'm going to try out cookies. Now, it didn't return anything. We didn't echo anything back. All we did was set a cookie. But we can actually test whether that cookie was set or not. In Firefox, I can go to Preferences and open up Preferences and look at Privacy. And that's where they're stored in Firefox. They might be somewhere different if you're using a different browser, but you'll be able to find a place where it says Show Cookies. And we have Accept Cookies from Sites, Keep Until They Expire was my default. So that'll work great for us. And then I can say Show Cookies. And we have a list of the cookies that we've downloaded before. Let's go ahead and find localhost, because that's what we're working with. And sure enough, here's localhost, and the cookie name is test, and we can actually see that the value of that is going to be 45. We have set our cookie, we've given it a name, and we have a value. Now, remember the fact that we're able to see the value of this cookie, because we're going to come back to that idea a little later on. Right now, we've set a cookie, but any user can take a look at their web browser and see the value of what we set. And maybe that number is not that meaningful to them, but maybe a hacker could actually use that number to do something malicious. So we're going to want to take some steps in the next movie to work around that. But for now, let's just keep moving and see how to read back in that cookie value. So we're going to close that web browser, and let's go ahead and make a new page. I'm just going to do save as, and I'm going to call this one cookies read, cookies_read. And I'm going to save that. This is a new page I'm working with, and I'm going to call this reading cookies. And I'm not going to set a cookie anymore. This time I'm interested in reading it back. And I'm just going to echo it to the browser. So we can say the variable, we'll call it var1 equals, and we know how to do this. It's just cookie and then test. And we have to refer to it by name. And then we'll just echo back to our browser the value of variable 1. So let's go ahead and run that. We'll come back to cookies_read, and it came back with 45. So it was able to read the cookie in. It only loaded this one page, and as soon as it saw cookie, it sent a request to the browser and said, let me have the cookie for that domain because I'm going to need the value of test. It then takes test and assigns it to our variable, and we echo it back in. So that's all there is to testing and getting cookies. Now, of course, if we wanted to get rid of a cookie, we can do that by setting its value to either nothing and or setting its expiration to a date in the past. We can try that. Let's open up our PHP sandbox again. And where's my original cookies file? Here we go. So I'm just going to copy that set cookie line, and I'll jump back into cookies read, and I'll put it right here. And I'm just going to add a little comment here just so that we can remember what we're doing and say, this will delete the cookie. And instead of being expiring 1 week from now, let's make it 1 week ago. Or we could even make it a month ago or a year ago. Something in the past that'll tell it your time's up. And we'll go ahead and set the value equal to 0 also. So it'll do both. It'll set it to something that's meaningless and tell it that it ought to expire. So let's run that page again. We'll reload it. And it came back with 45 because it read the cookie in and then echoed it to us and then unset it. So let's go ahead and load it again. And it comes back and says, nope, I didn't find a cookie with that name because we expired it. Now, of course, we can't rely on cookies always being there. The user has some control over these cookies. So we could set a cookie on a user's machine. They might go ahead and wipe out all their cookies, delete their cookie, change the values of their cookies even. And when we read it back in, we'll want to be careful about what we read back in to make sure that it is in fact valid data and that it does exist. And you'll see here we just got an error that says that there's an undefined index. And that's certainly not something we want to happen in our application. So whenever we read in a cookie, it's going to be a really good practice if we actually say if, and then do a statement where we check, is the cookie set? And we know how to do that. And I'll just grab cookie test here, drop it in there. So if the cookie is set, then we're going to use that variable. Now, if I try this right now, it's going to give me an error if the cookie's not set because it's going to try and echo back var1, and var1 hasn't been set to anything. So we do need to also give var1 a default value in case it doesn't exist. And we could do this inside a if-else statement if we wanted to instead. But the overall idea here is that we do want to make sure that var1 has a value. Don't set it to the cookie value unless we actually succeed in finding that cookie. So let's do a test for that and see if that works for us. We'll come back, and sure enough, it's equal to 0. If we were to go back and use our cookies page, which sets the value again, cookies, and then come back to our cookies read page and reload that page, it comes back with 45. Now it came back with 45 and then immediately unset it again, reload the page again, it'll be gone. We could go ahead and comment this out if we wanted to keep the deletion from happening. But the key point that I want to make here is that cookies are very useful for putting data onto the user's browser that we can retrieve later. If they come back to our site a month from now, a year from now, if their cookie is still there, we can pull up that information and know something about this user. But we also can't trust that the cookies will be there. So we have to check and make sure that the cookies are there before we actually rely on them inside our application. Now, because that data is not as reliable, and as we saw, we can actually see the content of what's inside a cookie, as well as possibly even change that value inside a cookie, we're going to want to look at another type of cookie, which is going to give us a lot more features and a little bit more security. It's going to be called a session, and that's what we're going to look at next.